Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 32 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Tembi Locke for this episode. I met Tembi at Camp Widow years ago, and I'm so glad I did. She's an actor and now a New York Times best-selling author. Her first book, From Scratch, A Memoir of Love, Sicily, and Finding Home, was recently published by Simon and Schuster and is one of Reese Witherspoon's picks for her book club. Tembi and I sat down to talk recently about her journey, including what she learned as a caregiver to her husband for 10 years, her service and advocacy work through the Kitchen Widow, what food and connection at her mother-in-law's table in Sicily has meant to her and her daughter in their grief, Tembi's tips for incorporating food into celebrations and memories, including simple tips for when cooking from scratch feels out of reach, her thoughts on showing up for her daughter even when she wasn't necessarily convinced that she could show up for herself, her aha moment in realizing that she and her daughter, though they had both lost the same person, have very different experiences based on their different relationships to that person, the idea that kids' grief is primarily looking ahead at what they're missing, while adults' grief is looking back at what they've lost, how helpful it's been for her to talk with friends who lost their dads when they were young, the relationship between anxiety and grief and her experience with this, and her desire to continue showing her daughter the world, both literally and in terms of preparing her for the world she will be living in. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Tembi Locke. My guest today is Tembi Locke. Tembi is an actor based in Los Angeles with over 60 TV and film credits to her name. Fans of the show Friends may recognize Tembi from the episode called The One Where Ross Hugs Rachel, and she started her on-screen career many years ago playing Carlton's girlfriend on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Today you can find her in roles on The Magicians, Proven Innocent, NCIS LA, and many others, including the upcoming feature film, The Obituary of Tunde Johnson. Tembi is also an advocate for better care for caregivers and families, a speaker on loss and resilience, a Sicilian chef's wife, a widowed parent, and now we can add the New York Times bestselling author to her list of accomplishments. Tembi, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, Jenny, it's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me. I love that we met so many years ago, and now I love this podcast that you're doing. It's so incredibly informative. It's a great act of service and, and advocacy. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And I love the workshop that you did at Camp Widow on vision boards. Honestly, I think it was the best one that I attended while I was there. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure.
I should tell readers also that your beautiful memoir is Reese Witherspoon's Hello Sunshine book club pick for May. So congratulations on that as well.
I know, it's kind of awesome. I never imagined. She's such a great champion for women's stories, and she's all about empowerment in a lot of ways in many areas of her life. So, including what the types of books she picks. So the fact that she would pick this book, which is its own kind of testament as a memoir to love and to loss, is just amazing. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so speaking of your book, I thought we could start out, if you don't mind here, by asking you to read a passage from your book, the book called From Scratch, A Memoir of Love, Sicily, and Finding Home. And what you're about to read from us is taking place when you're on your way back to Sicily for the first time after your husband died.
Yes, thank you for asking me to read a section. I certainly will. So this begins, that chapter that launches the first summer of the book, and I'll just jump right in. So Zoella, who is my daughter, Zoella was deep in sleep on my lap, her favorite stuffed panda under her arm. Her eyelids fluttered as I caressed her hair. We had crossed 9 time zones, and she had closed her eyes for only the last leg of the trip. In a matter of minutes, we would deplane and travel an hour and a half, drive east past the mountain of stone that lay ahead, to a woman, a mother, a town waiting for my return, his return. Sato was coming back to rest alongside his father, Giuseppe, the man who had once rejected his own son because of me, and I was returning with Sato's daughter, the only person left carrying his name. The plane touched ground with 3 gentle bumps, and I held Zoella closer, careful not to wake her just yet. She was the little girl with eyes like chestnuts and a face Sato adored. She was the one who had brought us all even deeper reconciliation and love. She was the reason Sato had been willing to struggle each year against what was medically convenient to return to Sicily. Being with his daughter in his homeland healed his heart as much, if not more, than the chemotherapy healed his body. Seeing his daughter sit at his mother's table brought color back to his face. Laughter spilled from him effortlessly. He had carved out timeless experiences in the face of little time that was left to him. He had given her memories of him dancing with her at the edge of the Mediterranean. And part of me hoped like hell I could keep giving her Sicilian summers, beautiful memories of time with his family. But I questioned the physical and emotional toll it might take at a time when I was still trying to find my bearings and to help her find hers. I was acutely aware that I was traveling with a 7-year-old child who still grieved so hard that her body shook at night until she fell asleep. A child who pushed dinner away because she wanted to wait for her dad. A child who refused to even speak to her Italian grandmother on the phone because the sound of her voice reminded her of her dad. My choice to come here meant that I'd have to parent her and her mercurial grief almost 7,000 miles away from home. My grief and love demanded all the strength I had and then asked for more.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. And I think you've really hit, the nail on the head with, so many of us, as you yourself too, a widowed parent. I mean, you're grieving at the same time your child is grieving and you're trying to help them. And I think you really hit it on the head here with how complicated and how difficult that is for us as widowed parents.
It certainly is, and especially, in that passage that I wrote is within the first 5 months of Sato's passing. So it captures that very raw, where I literally was still wobbly. I mean that not in a metaphorical sense, although I also mean it metaphorically, but I mean quite literally disoriented in my own body and in the world. So to be really present, right, in every sense, for myself, in my body, in spirit, and for her, it's a challenge. And I think, we don't know that until we walk through it. And I think you do the world a great service with this podcast by helping people to begin to unpack some of the complicated aspects of grieving and parenting.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So let's back up a little bit and let's learn a little more about you and your journey. So let's start right out with a story that I think should be a scene from a movie. Very well could have been. How did you and Sato meet?
Yes. So this is in the book, so I'm not giving too much away. But I was an exchange student in Florence. I studied art history in college, and so I was living in Florence my junior year abroad, and I'm walking down the street one day in Florence, and I round a corner, and I bump into a man. And that man would become my husband. Wow. So that is how, it's one of those, Great.
Yeah, that's amazing. And and so this man that you bumped into is from where?
He was Sicilian born, living in Florence at the time, working as a chef in a restaurant called Acqua Due. So that's where we were.
Okay.
And we were just a block away. Okay.
And you were from where?
I grew up in Texas, in Houston, Texas. And then at the time I was in school in Connecticut. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and I was, just studying abroad, not imagining that, this girl from Texas who would, be walking down the street in Florence one day and bump into a man who would quite literally change her life.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. And so fast forwarding then, you guys ultimately get married. And there's, by the way, there's lots of great detail in the book about your amazing courtship, so I'll let listeners read that for themselves. You guys eventually get married and settle where?
Well, we settled in Los Angeles.
Okay. And so then at some point, sadly, everything changed for you guys and he got sick. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah. So we were about, at that point, about 10 years into our, of being together, and about, more than, well over 5 or 7 years or so into our marriage, but definitely a decade of being together. And he was diagnosed with a rare soft tissue cancer. The proper scientific term is leiomyosarcoma. It's a rare soft tissue cancer, and it caught us completely by surprise, as often diagnoses do for everyone. And we really, it was the moment, literally, when everything changed in our lives, both in the obvious ways, because now illness sat at the center of our lives, and trying to navigate how to be resilient, thrive, survive, in the face of an ever-changing diagnosis and health condition, but also the trappings, or I should say the structure of our lives, changed also because he was no longer able to work as a chef. It showed up first in his bones and his knee. It had metastasized in and around the tissue there, so he wasn't able to really walk or be agile enough to actually do the strenuous work of being in the kitchen. So at the same time that he becomes a chef, that he is diagnosed, he loses also his career at the same time, and I gain a new role as being his caregiver. So all of that happened. I was 31 years old, and we are in the new moment in life. Right?
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, I write about that a bit in the book, the diagnosis part, and how that, and I write a bit about caregiving in the book as well, because it was a big part of our journey together, and it's a part of the journey that led up to my widowhood.
Yeah, and you were a caregiver, I think, for 10 years before he died.
I was.
And you gave a TED talk on that topic, right?
I did.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what you learned being a caregiver for so long?
Oh my gosh, how many TED Talks? How much time do you have, I should say? How much time? It's sort of like, that you could just sort of fit that. I'm still unpacking the lessons that I've learned. On the most, I guess, top of mind, the most obvious things I could say is that it taught me about our capacity for human love, and the capacity to really be and sit with another person at a critical moment in their lives. It taught me about my own humanity, but it also taught me about, how to show up emotionally. We were the beneficiaries of so much incredible generosity and care from others. So I also saw community grow, and I know a lot about what that can look like, and what it takes to sort of be the people around a couple or a family or an individual who's going through a diagnosis. But in terms of caregiving, I think one of the big takeaways that I had is to never take this precious thing we call life for granted. Right? It is so, and I mean that both in our own bodies and in our own lives, but also for the people that we meet daily, because we don't know what anyone is particularly going through, and we don't know the challenges that they are presently sitting in or will sit in the future. So I think it taught me a great deal of compassion for both myself and for others. Yeah. And a lot of other things like the brass tacks of caregiving. And there's a lot of that,
yes,
because as you know, there's just a lot of there's a lot of the technical, but I think that's a lot of that, can be found in the world, and there's a great luckily now with, the proliferation. When Sada was diagnosed, there was less available sort of, at your fingertips. You had to go sort of hunting for it. But now there's so much in the public discourse around the need to help caregivers, the need to support them, spaces for them to discuss that experience. I didn't really have all of that at the time. Toward the end of his illness, I did, but not at the beginning. So I like to talk now a lot about the more heart-centered things that it taught me, because that's the legacy now that I'm out of the day-to-day.
And I think you're doing some of this through your project called The Kitchen Widow. Can you tell us, well, first of all, what does the word kitchen widow mean? And then what are you doing?
Oh, absolutely. Sure, absolutely. So the kitchen widow is actually a restaurant slang sort of kitchen term, usually for the spouse partner of the chef, right? So they're a kitchen widow because their partner is often, is married to the kitchen at the restaurant and not to, their partner. And so, all my life and during, our marriage, I was a kitchen widow because I was, holidays, weekends, he was always working. I had friends for years, years, like 4 or 5 years, and they were like, do you really have a husband? Like, where is he? Like, and I'm like, well, we could go to the restaurant, but so it's a term in the lexicon of professional kitchens. And after Sado's passing, when it became clear to me that I wanted to share some of what I had learned and sort of use my creative talents toward an act of service, I thought, oh yes, the Kitchen Widow. I will create a platform. So it's an online platform that has resources for caregivers and for those who are grieving and the communities around them. And I have this conversation through dinner parties, and I cook from Sado's recipes. So it's sort of a whole full circle, ecosystem of everything that I know creatively and in my heart.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, I'll put a link to the Kitchen Widow for sure in the show notes for people. And there are some great recipes there. In fact, if we have time at the end, I want to ask you about the red wine infused sea salt because I would love to know how to use it. But let's circle back to that one later.
Okay.
And I'm going to put a link to your TEDx talk as well, because I think people should take a
Thank you
and watch that. Yeah, for sure. So so since food is a really major theme throughout the book and throughout your life, of course. Let's talk a little bit about food. And first of all, can you tell us how you marked that first anniversary of Sado's death?
Yes. So the first anniversary, I was very clear that I didn't want Zoella, my daughter, and I didn't want us to be alone. That was very clear about that. And I don't know, you may have talked with other guests on your show, you may have this in your own personal experience, but there's so much solitude. And I want to distinguish solitude from aloneness, right? Because solitude in and of itself is not a bad thing, but when you're grieving deeply, to be left alone, right, it can feel very, you feel honestly, I felt at times, really abandoned in this new life, meaning how could I harness the people around me when we needed it most? The challenging thing was I didn't know when we would need it most because grief doesn't move in a straight line. And so what I chose to do for the first anniversary was I knew I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to be surrounded by people who knew and loved him, and I wanted to cook some of his food. And I wanted to fill the house with love because the house had felt so empty all year long, and not that no one came to visit us, but you know what I mean? It's just, that it without the rhythm of another individual who was beloved by she and I, there was an emptiness that sat at the center of our lives, and I wanted to, for one day, try to fill that. So I chose to prepare fava beans. In a Sicilian way. I grew fava beans. We grew fava beans. I have heirloom beans from Sicily. And I had planted them earlier that year, because it was something we did every January, and it turns out that by spring they were ready, which is at the same time we would have been celebrating the anniversary. So I invited friends over, and I made this and mini dishes, and people brought things, and it was a really wonderful way to not be alone on that special day. And it kind of took the weight off of me trying to mark it by myself for my child.
Yeah. And I think I remember that you had to actually call Sado's mother all the way in Sicily to get some tips on how to prepare them.
I sure did. Absolutely. Because that's the other thing that can often happen. Memory is fickle, and in loss, we have, just as, for those listeners who know about caregiving, and through especially cancer caregiving, chemo brain, there's chemo brain, but then I call it like grieving brain is also just all over the place. So even though we had made this recipe many times, I knew it, I'd watched Sado do it, I still didn't feel like I fully knew what I was doing that day, and I was very concerned, like I wanted to really be beautiful and get it right, so I called Sato's mom, and of course she gave me some incredible tips, and I shared that in the book.
Yeah, cool. And you also talk a lot in the book about spending, well, in fact, your book is structured around the first 3 summers that you spent with her at her table in Sicily in a very small village where Sato had grown up. Can you talk a little bit about what food and cooking and that whole scene has meant to you and your daughter, as you've dealt with your grief over the years?
Oh gosh, I would say for sure that specifically with the way that we eat at the table in Sicily and being, enveloped in my mother-in-law's arms and in her heart by in her presence and the time that we have together. One of the ways her love language is food, right? So the way that she could help to ease us, to soothe us is, and let me back up and say, when I talk about languages, I think it's important. I use that term food language specifically, but also in a real literal sense. She speaks Sicilian. My daughter and I speak English and Italian. She speaks Italian. It's not her mother tongue. So we really are cobbling together our communication through each of us a second language. Italian being her second language, Italian being my second language. So when that breaks down, right? And sometimes it does, there's food, and the food love language comes in, right? And of course she's a Sicilian grandma and a Sicilian mother-in-law. And so there's all of the sort of, the things you might imagine that come with that. But also the fact that it's Sicily and it's the summertime and we are eating very directly from the land. We're eating seasonally. We are, I can go and point to the actual spot in the ground where the zucchini came from. I can point to my daughter, has met the sheep that gives her the pecorino cheese. There's this way in which everything is very immediate. There's no separation. There's a kind of closeness that is both, in what the ingredients that are on the plate, but in the hands that prepare it and the energy around it all. So that altogether becomes incredibly healing. And that is what food means to us when we're there in the summer. It's a way to both slow down, to be present, to be connected, to explore, try new things, explore. And in this case, what we're doing over the course of these 3 summers is the 3 of us, myself, my mother-in-law, and my daughter, we're exploring a new relationship after loss. We're finding out how to all be together in a new configuration when the person who connected us is no longer there with us in physical form. Right? And so all of that is also playing out at the table. Because we get to talk, we can have memories, so the table becomes this beautiful, sacred space to really do some of the deep dive, but not in an intellectual way, not in a heady way. It's just being, really being fully present.
Yeah. Okay. And I should inject here that you've got some fabulous recipes at the end of your book. And actually I made one the other night, since I knew we'd be talking today. It was the ditalini with the lentils.
Bello. Did you enjoy it?
I did very much. In fact, I had leftovers then for lunch yesterday. So
well, it's great. I mean, the lentils are a big part of the Sicilian table. So delicious. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So I hope that people will try some of those recipes. I wonder, for anybody who maybe feel like tackling whole recipes right now is, overwhelming or whatever. Do you have any tips on how to, kind of food related ways to mark an occasion that are kind of quick and easy, maybe don't involve, from scratch?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I will say, what we did a lot that first year was to go to, and this is tricky. This gets tricky when you're grieving because the memory piece is there, but we would do what we called like dad or dinners that we felt would connect us to Sado. Now, sometimes that might mean going to a place we'd all gone together, but it also may be like trying a new thing that we think he would like to try. So what that did was it took the pressure off of me having to cook. It was a way in to making space for our shared loss, and it was also a way to connect into a beautiful memory.
Yeah.
And the tricky thing there is that sometimes you don't want to do it. It's like, I don't want to be reminded of that today. I don't want to think about it. And so you have to kind of bow to that, especially with your child. Many times my daughter would say, no, not today. And I'd say, okay, you know. But in terms of quick, easy things, I think in terms of food prep, definitely I found that in that first year of grief, and even now, finding foods that feel nourishing and with optimal nutrition are kind of the best things you can get your hands on when you're grieving, because you're doing so much work internally and emotionally in the form of grief that you really need as much sustenance, as possible. And so if you have people who are willing to do that cooking for you, maybe once a week, help out, or if you can purchase it, that would be wonderful. Or sometimes doing it with someone in company can make the preparation feel less daunting. Right? So inviting a friend over to cook, or, one of the things that was really, I was so grateful for that first year, were so many friends who just once a week were like, do you guys want to come have dinner with us? And that took a lot of pressure off. So if anyone is out there listening who's the friend of someone who's grieving, doing that and putting that in place can be really helpful. So those are kind of some ways around navigating, feeding yourself when you don't really feel like doing anything because life is just too, out of control. Right. And, and we did do the joke my daughter and I have is that, we did do a lot of, what I call freezer cooking that first year, which is like, things out of the freezer that I add a fresh salad to, because I didn't have the bandwidth. Yeah. Right. And you have to bow to that. And so you just try to make the best and most healthy choices you can.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So let's shift a little bit and talk a little bit about parenting after loss. So I know you've talked about there's a saying in Italy. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. It's called "Si tira avanti." How do you say that correctly?
Si tira avanti.
Okay. Yeah, you say it so much nicer than I do. And it means pull yourself forward, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So in the book, you talked about needing to pull yourself forward for Zoella. And so I was wondering if you could talk about showing up for her, even when you weren't really maybe convinced that you could show up for yourself.
Yeah. I would say one of the, I think as parents, that happens a lot for us, right? And in my case, I can only speak personally, but there were moments where I can look back and say, thank God, my motherhood often sat in the front seat, and I would put my grief in the back seat when it was in service to her, right? And sometimes, and over time, what that did was teach me that, one, I could do that, and at times I'm thinking specifically, the first year, I don't know if other parents have gone through this, but I had a hard time with school events. School events were really, really hard, and yet you need to show up for that play, that symphony, that, that art show, that whatever it is, right? But something about being in the company of all the other parents and not having your partner there with you, your co-parent, that's a hard day for your child as well sometimes. Those events, and they come fast and furious sometimes, depending on the season, depending on what time of year it is, were really hard, and yet I knew I needed to show up for her because, one, she needed me. Two, I wanted her to feel as solid as she could in the world. And three, although I wasn't aware of this at the time, ultimately, I think what I was doing early on was also trying to show her that we could still, have joy, love, expansion in life. I didn't have those words. I didn't think of it consciously that way. But I think by, one of the things I knew I couldn't just pull the rug out from under her further by just, taking away from her things that I knew she needed, peer interaction, the rituals of school. And so I had to show up for those, and it's very, very challenging. But I think those are also some of the more beautiful moments and the things that we go back to. And over time, because I'm now 7.5 years since Otto passed, so I've had many school years subsequent, I can look back and see that those early moments, that first year, really first 2, almost 3 years, was really about learning for myself what I could and couldn't do. And there were times when I said, okay, this one I can't do, and I would get a trusted family member or friend, to maybe be there either with me and help me do that, so that I could fully show up for her, because then I had someone there that I could lean into in that difficult moment. I learned skills. They don't come right. You don't have them right out of the box. It's a toolbox that you're constantly refining.
Yeah.
At least that's what I found.
Yeah. Well, and a couple of things you mentioned there reminded me actually of a passage in your book. You talked about a trip you guys took to Stromboli, you and Zoella, on one of your, I think it was one of your early visits back to Sicily. And you talked about, I thought it was kind of interesting. You talked about how, you told yourself you will be the one to show Zoella the world, that you can still find kernels of joy and excitement. But then you're on this boat, I think, going to the island, and you're overcome with anxiety, and you start envisioning all these doomsday scenarios, and you're like, what was I thinking, bringing the two of us on this, to this volcano?
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yeah, that kind of is that was my whole first year in a nutshell. My whole first year was, yes, we can. Oh my God, what have I done? I can't. It was like, yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. And that scene, and for those who are listening, I would really encourage people to go to, Claire Bidwell Smith has written a great book about grief and anxiety, because I think it's interesting that you picked that section, because the two things are toggling, they're working together in concert.
Yeah.
And how in her book, which is Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, I was unprepared for how much anxiety I had that really for years after, but certainly that first year. And that moment somehow being on a boat out in the open water, right? With a 7-year-old child, I was like, what have I done? And of course, I went into full on, anxiety mode.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet we got there, and it's one of the best memories. It's one of our best, so.
Yeah. Well, and so to bring it up to today then, what have you figured out about carrying on and being the one now to show her the world as she grows, and as you move through life? Have you figured out?
Well, I think, no, we don't figure out anything. We're here. I think we're figuring out stuff until we take our last breath. I hope, that's like the hope for life, right? Sure. I guess the only thing I know at this point is that intention is still clear for me. And what I mean by show her the world, I think at that point, I think I meant it in a very literal sense. Like I really wanted to go physically to places that her dad and I had always wanted to go together, or to take her. I wanted to be able to sort of fulfill that for her. And I still hold that very true in my heart and in our planning. I kind of always go back to that list sometimes and think, okay, is this the time we can maybe do that, adventure? But I think ultimately show her the world now means something different for me. It means really show her all parts of life and the world that she will, and to help her be prepared for the world that she's going to step into as an adult, right? And so the best gift I can give her is to prepare her for that. And for me, that means being honest, being straightforward. It means, and I'm thinking specifically as a parent of a child who grieves. One of the things, the promises that I made early on was to always try to be as honest as possible about things. So when she asked me, is my dad coming back? Where did he go? Why did he die? To answer those questions, the big questions that kids who are grieving have, to answer them with honesty so that she would always trust me in that sense. And I think that now what I try to do in terms of showing her the world child is showing her a way of being in the world, right? So no matter where she goes, because she will go many places, hopefully she may be have more stamps in her passport than I ever will, and that she be able to, wherever she goes, she's grounded and solid in who she is. That's the best gift I can give her.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an idea that I heard for the first time a few years back in one of your Kitchen Widow videos, and I thought it was really interesting. This idea that, you as the mother and Zoella as the daughter were both grieving the same person, but that you had two very different relationships to that person, one as a husband, one as a father. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, recognizing that and the importance of recognizing that.
Sure, that was pointed out very clearly to me through a series of conversations, some with her and then also with my own therapist, and readings that I did. I learned, because we had an early experience where I said something, that to her probably sounded like a platitude. I was like, I know how you feel. I think I used those words. And she very quickly at 7 was like, no, you don't know how I feel. Actually, your father's sitting in the next room.
Ah.
And she was 7 years old. So you can't, as a mom, like it was the awareness, the stark reality of that. I couldn't turn away from that. She was very clearly telling me that her experience is different. So yes, we both love the same person, but she's going to have a childhood experience that I never had.
Mm-hmm.
I never had. And she, at 7, and as a child, cannot understand what it means to lose a partner and a husband. She's not there yet. She's only 7,
Right.
So she won't understand my grief at times, and there's times that I won't understand hers, both in terms of our direct lived experiences. So then it becomes about what do we do to understand and to find common ground, right, in moments when maybe what her needs are very different from my needs. And so that was a really big aha moment for me early on, was not to assume that she is feeling the way I'm feeling on a given day, that she has the same sort of, angle on a situation that I do. She has a different path.
Mm-hmm.
And for her, what I have learned, and there are more experts, and I'm sure in your work, because you talk to experts all the time, I remember reading people who say that, for children, their grief marches forward in a different way, meaning that as they grow and develop, they will have to revisit it at a new developmental stage, right? It's going to continue to change so that it's going to keep moving forward in time, whereas for the adult, the partner, the wife, the husband, let's say, that our grief, we're always looking back at our loss, where she's looking forward at her loss. We're looking back to the events that we had, the marriage I had, that, the time we first did this, the time we first did that. She's looking at the time that she won't be able to do that. So it's like you're looking at the timeline in different directions. I don't know if I articulated that well, so forgive me if I didn't, but I'm attempting to say that, her gaze is cast forward, and whereas those of adults it's often cast back.
Yeah. No, I think actually,
and so
I think you articulated it very well. I haven't heard it articulated quite that way before. So I think that's really helpful.
Well, yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's what I've come to. So that is also a way I kind of remind myself, like, oh, okay, this thing is coming up for her, this school event or this graduation. It may bring up things for her.
Yeah.
Whereas, I may still be thinking about something, 15 years ago, a beautiful memory from 15 years ago. And it's not to say that at every life marker that will be her experience, but as a parent, I kind of anticipate it. The possibility that it might come up. Just anticipate it. Right. And then just be present. If it comes up, you're kind of have given a little thought about how to deal with it. If it doesn't come up, that's okay.
Right. Yeah, so important. And what you were just saying reminds me too, I think, of why I've found so interesting the interviews that I've done with some adults who, when they themselves were a child or a teenager, they lost their parent and they now are reflecting back. And so I think as a parent, it helps me to kind of understand maybe some of those things. Because like you said, your dad was alive and in the next room, and your daughter called that out early. And so for me, and so I think for me, talking to these adults who can try to give a little bit of insight into what my kids might be going through has been really useful. Yeah.
I've done the same thing. I have a few key friends in my life who lost fathers. They're women, and they lost fathers at 2, 7, and teenage years, and they each have different experience, similar but different experiences based on what age they were when they lost that father figure.
Right.
And so I really call on them a lot to say, do you remember this? And they'll say, oh yeah, oh yeah. And I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah, no, so important. Thank you for articulating that for us. Gosh, I think we could keep talking the rest of the afternoon here, but we are running out of time. Let me ask you, I know the number one question. Well, what is the number one question that you've gotten from readers on social media and so forth?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, people want to know, people want to know lots of things. It's funny, you write a memoir and people want to know lots of things about your life. It's so funny. Right, yeah. So, but no, people want to know how Nona's doing and how Zoella's doing, and I'm happy to say both are doing well.
Oh, good. Thank you for sharing that. What is your favorite recipe from the book? If people want to flip to the back and try something, what should they do first?
Oh my gosh, that's like asking me to pick a favorite friend. Oh my God, I can't do it. I don't know. Shoot, I say the thing that's in my fridge right now, ready to go, is the classic Sicilian tomato sauce.
Ah, yes.
I always have it on hand.
Yeah.
Like I always have it on hand.
Yeah.
So it's certainly the most used. They're all favorites, but that's the most consumed.
Very good. Okay, well, I will try that one next then. And so one last question then. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them? Oh, gosh.
Take it easy. Allow time for rest when you can find it. And please be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
Just be gentle. Just be gentle.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
It is, yeah.
You're not making it up. It's hard work.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Tembi Locke, actor and New York Times bestselling author of From Scratch, A Memoir of Love, Sicily, and Finding Home. So Tembi, where can listeners find you if they'd like to learn more about you and your work?
Yes. You can visit my website, tembilocke.com. And there's all kinds of information there about events, places if I'm going to be, on the book tour. There are links to different things about me, and there's also my social media handles are there, which is Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And we do fun giveaways, and if you subscribe through my website, you get once a month sort of personalized information and first looks at things. So it's really fun. So follow me there.
A guide to visiting Sicily, right? When you first subscribe,
you get a guide to visiting Sicily. And now we've just created a new reader's guide for book clubs.
Oh, fantastic!
So there's a reader's guide that you can also get. Yes, exactly. Right. Once you subscribe, you can get it. So that's it.
Very good.
I look forward. Thank you so much, Jenny. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Tembi Locke as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 32. Also, please join me for the next podcast discussion group on Sunday, August 4th. We meet on Zoom video chat, so you can join from anywhere on your computer or phone. Sign up at widowedparentpodcast.com if you haven't already. I'll be sending discussion questions and call-in details ahead of time to those who've signed up. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, would you take a moment to share it with your friends? Sharing is the best way to get the word out so other widowed parents can find the podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.